My name is Bonnie Herrick. This is my husband Joe, and we have been married 32 years. 33.
Be 30 in June, yeah.
So yes, and we are, since December of last year, we have been at Greenwood Village, and we're waiting for a cottage, hopefully soon.
Our story has to go back to the fact that I was married once before. My first wife died of breast cancer. She and I had a home up on Lake Michigan's summer home. In the summer of 1986, she developed a lump on her breast. That fall, she had a partial mastectomy. The lump was removed, and we understood that there was some perhaps penetration into the lymph nodes. But in any event, she had a series of radiation that fall, and that winter she had chemotherapy, and by spring of 1987, she looked great, felt great, had an MRI, no evidence of any cancer. We had been both very active in a Bible study called Bible Study Fellowship. In any event, Bible Study Fellowship was intimate in our Christian walk and in our development as Christians. And through that, I had been exposed to a woman by the name of Bonnie Anderson, who had become, who I should mention, started Bible Study Fellowship in where by name I knew her to speak to. She was better acquainted with my wife because she was in a position of leadership in the women's work. To make a long story short, as you that have cottages on Lake Michigan, you go up on Memorial Day weekend and open them up, and you go back up on Labor Day weekend and you close them. That Labor Day weekend in 1987, when we went up, the second or third day after we'd been up there, I got up in the morning ahead of my wife. Her name was Janice. She came out of the bedroom and I looked at her and I said, "You don't feel well, do you?" And she said, "No." I said, "I better take you home." I took her home, and to make a long story short, the cancer had metastasized. It had penetrated her brain, and she died later that month. That was June. The time I brought her home the previous fall, while she was recovering and going through the radiation and the chemotherapy, the one time right after her surgery at night, before we were getting ready for bed, she was in a dressing room and I was in the bathroom. She said, "If anything happens to me, I want you to marry Bonnie." Bonnie had been divorced, and I don't know where she was or what she was doing, but she no longer was involved in BSF. Anyway, I said to her, "The doctor said he got everything and you're going to be fine. So I don't know what you're talking about, really." She repeated that a number of times. About 3 or 4 months after my wife died, I got a sympathy card with a return address of Plano or Allen, Texas, somewhere in Texas. And Bonnie had received the word that my wife had died and sent me a sympathy card. And she was kind enough, thoughtful enough to put her phone number on it. So after looking at it and pondering it came to my attention after a while that, gee, is this the Bonnie Anderson that my wife had told me about that I ought to marry? And make a long story short, several months, I believe it was, after that, I got that card. I called her on the phone. I'd been widowed at that point 3 or 4 or 5 months. To make a long story short, after calling her and talking on the phone, we seemed to have a lot in common. We talked about BSF and talked about lectures. We'd had some history of giving, and over the period of about 6 or 7 months, one thing led to another, and I was calling now at that point about once a week. And the following spring, as it approached, I decided that I would fly down to Dallas, Texas for her birthday. And what I hadn't realized was I'd fallen in love again. And all on the phone, almost entirely. She did come up one time in the fall, and I did get to see her and have a better look at her, and I thought, gee, this is interesting. One thing led to another, and as I went down to meet her, what I didn't know is she was going to a big church called Fellowship Bible Church. Gene Getz was a pastor, and they had a history and a pattern of every church service, Sunday service, that was close to Valentine's Day. They would give the ushers microphones and ask them to circulate through the crowd. And it was a big auditorium, seated about 4,500 people. It had a big balcony. It was about half the people could be up there, and we were up on the balcony. And they said, just put your hand up when you're ready to tell us something about what Valentine's Day means to you and what your experience is that you'd like to share, that you think the church would be interesting in. And after listening to I finally put my hand up, and they handed me the mic, and I said, you probably do not know this, but you have an unclaimed blessing in your presence that's a member of this church. Her name is Bunny Anderson, and I flew down yesterday from Indianapolis, Indiana, and last night I proposed to Bunny, and guess what? She accepted. And about that time, there was a hooting and hollering and clapping, and everybody was as overjoyed as I was. That's how we ended up. In about 4 or 5 months after that, and a little over a year after my first wife died, I married Bunny on June 10th of 1988. So I have had 2 beautiful, loving Christian wives. And this one now for 32 years.
Yeah.
Going on 33.
Not per se.
No.
Dinner out and
Dinner out is about it.
chocolates.
She's already got her
roses.
Seas candy.
Oh,
They
it's
came
done.
earlier than I thought.
That's okay.
So she's
And,
still working on them.
Roses.
Yeah.
Sometimes one for every year. Sometimes not at all.
Mhm.
It's just it works out that way. When your happiness doesn't depend on how many roses you got and what color they are, or how big the chocolates were. Your happiness depends on being with him and enjoying each other. And he's my best friend, and I'd rather be with him than anybody else.
You need to have a relationship with the Lord that's going to be the center of your marriage, and both believe and understand what that includes. And once you have that settled, and there's no disagreement about that relationship with the Lord, that you are truly in love with him first, and trust and expect him to be the leader of your life, they'll overcome and take care of any problems that might come later on down the road. But you need to have that settled first. And once you settle that, then everything else falls together. And you need to continue that as you grow closer together and grow closer to the Lord as days go by. And that's where we are and have been for 32 years now.
Yeah, I think it might have been Russ Blowers, who married us second time, said that in a marriage you give 100%. He gives 100%, and it works out. You want to give me a kiss, or you want to just tweak my? No.
Of course. Yes.